What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Just got back from seeing The Batman in IMAX. And for tonight's review, I'm going to try something a little different. Ordinarily, I like to write them out in advance and then basically read it and then edit it, etc. But it's a little late. I'm a little tired. So tonight, I'm just going to kind of wing it so you get more of an immediate emotional response. And as a way of giving it some structure, I wrote up some questions in advance, basically questions based on my initial expectations. So I'm going to be almost doing a Q&A with myself, because otherwise I would just start ranting and raving and rambling. And when I'm this tired and I have this much caffeine in my system, it would just fly off the rails. But because this movie is not available to most people for a few more days, I will be keeping this video spoiler free. But who knows, if I find myself still thinking about the Batman a couple days from now, I might come back with a spoiler review. But what's not a spoiler is that this is a brand new standalone version of the Batman that's not tied into any other ongoing movies. With The Flash later this year, we're going to be seeing both Michael Keaton as well as Ben Affleck, but this is just a self-contained story, and assuming it does well, this is the beginning of a trilogy to be helmed by director Matt Reeves. And I guess in broad strokes, if I were to characterize his approach to it, this is a down and dirty, gritty, Zodiac-esque or Seven-esque take on Gotham and Batman, where Batman's very early in his career. He's not a newbie, he's about 2 years in, but he's still learning the tricks of the trade. And it's much more of a just kind of gnarly detective story, which is appropriate in that the character first appeared in Detective Comics 27 way back in 1939. At any rate, let's get to my questions. So first question, and most important question of all, did I enjoy the movie? Did I like it? And I'm going to try to answer this in a way where I forget every previous iteration of the character, because I'm 45 years old. I've obviously read and seen and experienced Batman in many, many different forms over the years. And my first initial response is, I liked it quite a bit. And seeing it in a sold-out theater, ordinarily New Yorkers can be a little rambunctious in the movie theater. They text constantly. They'll take phone calls. Anyway, they just treat it like their living room. And the audience on the whole was in this like hushed state of awe throughout most of the movie. And that was really refreshing to experience. Of course, there was one idiot who brought a toddler who was jabbing her away most of the movie, and a few people were checking their phones. But on the whole, by New York standards, you could tell that the audience was really into it, and they gave it a big thunderous applause at the end. And I hadn't had that kind of, I guess, a crowd experience in a theater in well over 2 years, not once at any point during the pandemic. So not only did I like the movie, but I really enjoyed just the movie-going experience. And another thing I want to say is that if you're suffering from a mild case of superhero burnout, not because you don't like the genre or category or whatever, but just because you're tired of it being like the only realistic option at the movie theater, I mean, it's like we get kids animated movies and we get superhero movies. And, I like to see stories using all kinds of genres like horror and comedy or sexual thrillers or whatever the case might be. I don't want to see a world that's completely dominated solely by people in tights punching each other. And at some point at some point the wave will crash and pull back. But every once in a while, a superhero movie comes along and kind of makes you forget about your fatigue or burnout or whatever the case might be. And I think The Batman is one of those movies. I think this is a superhero movie that's going to appeal to people who don't ordinarily care for superhero movies, because it is trying to do a slightly more adult, sophisticated take on the genre. And also, like I said, it does feel like it's borrowing from or taking inspiration from David Fincher movies like Zodiac or Seven. And so if people just like detective stories or investigation stories or police procedurals, they're going to enjoy watching Batman as the world's greatest detective. And there have been times over the years where we've seen him briefly go into detective mode. This movie goes all in on him as like basically Sherlock Holmes, and I found that to be incredibly refreshing. So my next question I wrote for myself was, did Matt Reeves get it right? Now, I've seen in a lot of reviews people talking about this movie as like, to what degree is it comic books accurate? And I always kind of push back on that phrasing, because what the hell does that even mean? Like, going back to 1939, we've seen so many different interpretations of the character. If you ask somebody from the late 60s, what is comic books accurate? They're going to say the era of Neil Adams. But if you ask somebody from the late 90s, what is comic books accurate, they're going to talk about Grant Morrison's interpretation of the character in the pages of JLA. Or if you ask somebody from the mid-'80s, they're going to say, oh, well, Frank Miller's take on the character. That's comic books accurate. Or if you're just talking to movie freaks, there are people who love Tim Burton. There are people who love Bruce Timm's animated series. There are people who love Christopher Nolan. The more important question is, did Matt Reeves create a compelling, unique interpretation of the mythos or the character or this fictional setting? And the answer is yes. The style, the look, the tone, the atmosphere. There are going to be plenty of people who are not receptive to his approach, but no one's going to be able to deny that he didn't have his own fresh take. And I think this movie is wildly superior to the previous Planet of the Apes movies that Matt Reeves was a part of. He's leveled up in a big way. It's almost like his entire career has been building up to this point, and he left it all on the battlefield. Everything that he can do as a filmmaker, he just threw it all into this movie. So I would say that Matt Reeves delivered. Matt Reeves gave us a really compelling vision of the character. Whether or not he got it right, I guess we can all argue and debate over what the right version of Batman is, but for me, I always like to be surprised. I didn't ask for the Tim Burton version in 1989, but I was delighted when I got it. And at no point while I was watching this movie did I feel like I'd seen this version of the Batman before. So my next question that I wrote in advance for myself was, what defines Matt Reeves' take in terms of the look, the sounds, the performances, the atmosphere, the narrative? And I guess one of the key ingredients is the work of director of photography Greg Fraser, who also shot Dune for Denis Villeneuve. I've never seen a Batman movie that looks like this before, and there are going to be some people who complain about the fact that a lot of it is just frankly hard to see because there's a lot of surveillance scenes from different characters, and there's a lot of rain, and there's a lot of darkness, and they're deliberately obscuring the image at times, but then there'll be these flashes of light or gunfire where you see the action, and it's a completely different approach to fleshing out the underbelly of Gotham. But I really responded to the overall look. It's not like an overly kind of gothic, hyper-stylized version, but it is stylish. It's just, how can I say it? It's not like down and dirty documentary style, but it's a great look for a city that's being depicted in a way where it's corrupt from the top to the bottom. This is a city that's rotting with corrupt politicians, corrupt cops, corrupt gangsters, crazy supervillains, psychos on the loose, all that stuff. And I feel like the overall kind of visual aesthetic perfectly complements the story that's being told. As far as the sounds go, I don't know if I'm saying his last name correctly, but Michael Giacchino, the composer, he really delivered, and it's a very simple theme. It's just dum, bum, bum, bum. You hear it multiple times in the trailer, but it really works, and it's employed in very surprising ways at times where whenever you hear it, like, oh shit, Batman's about to fuck some people up. And I really liked that simple but powerful theme. And also, for people out there who are too young to know who the hell Nirvana is, Nirvana's song Something in the Way, which is also used in the trailer, it also appears in the movie. And I think there are going to be a lot of people who are teenagers now who go back and rediscover what it was like to be into grunge in the early 90s, because that was one of Nirvana's big songs, like in 1991 or 1992, whenever that song first came out. So yeah, overall, I'd have to say I was a massive fan of the music throughout. And as far as performances go, the cast is a very deep bench of talent being employed in this, and most of them do some really solid stuff with their characters. Zoe Kravitz was absolutely phenomenal as Catwoman. I mean, she is lethal and sexy and confident and cool, and everybody's going to be in love with the cat and the bat. I mean, people have been in love with the cat and the bat for many, many decades, but I think people who don't know how cool it is seeing the cat and the bat on the screen at the same time together, it's just going to be a vivid reminder of those dramatic possibilities. Whether or not she is the superior to Michelle Pfeiffer or Anne Hathaway or any of the previous iterations, that's for everybody to decide, but I would be totally down to see more of Zoe Kravitz in the character. And Robert Pattinson, he's a damn good Batman. He's not doing Christian Bale's approach. He's definitely not doing Ben Affleck's approach. He's got his own style, and the key to playing Batman well is always you can't just be a badass Batman. You also have to do an interesting job with Bruce Wayne. And he's just this tormented. Some people are describing it as emo, like in a very condescending, kind of dismissive way. I didn't find it to be emo, but he's just a very brooding, distant, kind of psychotic guy who's at this point totally happy to let his Bruce Wayne persona kind of slide. Bruce Wayne is the secret identity, Batman is the true identity. But I'd say on the whole, if I was going to give him a grade out of 100, it'd be like in the low 90s or mid 90s. I mean, he absolutely nailed it. And there are going to be a lot of people who push back on him because everybody always resists like the new Batman or the new James Bond or the new whomever. It's always tough to make that switch. And he won't persuade or convince everybody, but he's going to persuade quite a few. And as far as the villains go, Paul Dano and Colin Farrell, totally different, but fucking astonishing. Paul Dano, I mean, he's been doing psychotic work since There'll Be Blood back in 2007. He's a really intense actor, but he's awesome as the Riddler, and I've never seen a version of the Riddler like this before. And that brings me back to the point of whether or not this is comic books accurate. Nothing about his interpretation of the character is comic books accurate, but it's still outstanding. So while in general, when it comes to books and comics, etc., I defer to or lean toward or prefer people trying to do the most faithful adaptation that they can. But if you've got a great idea and a fresh take, go for it. And Paul Dano, goddamn, the Riddler's never been this terrifying. And then I would argue with Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin's never been this funny. I mean, for a movie that's so kind of dour, he is just this kind of, fantastic gangster persona, like hey, sweetheart, that sort of thing. But like Colin Farrell has completely disappeared inside the role, and his accent's great. I mean, he is unrecognizable, but yeah, I love Colin Farrell, and he absolutely knocked it out of the park. Who else is in this? Jeffrey Wright, damn good as Jim Gordon, and it's almost like a buddy cop movie at times with the Bat and Jim Gordon working in tandem, doing a police procedural plot, and they have great chemistry, and I really enjoyed them together. Peter Sarsgaard is good. Andy Serkis is pretty good as Pennyworth. I mean, I still love Michael Caine, but I will grow to love Andy Serkis. The only person who I thought perhaps dropped the ball just a tad was John Turturro, and I say that with all love and respect because John Turturro, he's been delighting me for decades in things like Miller's Crossing and Barton Fink and Big Lebowski. Those are all Coen Brothers movies, but he's a little bit more kind of bland and generic as Carmine Falcone in this than the rest of the cast, but that's probably just because the rest of the cast is doing such a good job. They make him seem a little weaker by comparison. But moving on to my next question that I wrote for myself, I wrote, what were your top 5 favorite ingredients? And top of the list has to be Paul Dano, just totally fresh approach, and it feels very contemporary, very new, but at the same time, it's still the Riddler. I mean, I can't remember when the Riddler first appeared in the comics, but every version of the Riddler that I've seen more or less has like a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram. This is very different, but obviously still using riddles, and that's part of the fun of watching Batman. It shows how brilliant Batman is as he's dissecting and unpacking and kind of, just figuring out these really complex puzzles that the Riddler is cooking up. And so, yeah, if your only impression of the Riddler is Jim Carrey from Batman Forever, you're going to be completely caught off guard. As I mentioned before, the score is very cool. But number 3, The Bat and the Cat. I like it when Batman and Catwoman are sexy. And in Dark Knight Rises, Nolan didn't really lean into the sex appeal of having 2 people in black leather jumping off rooftops together. If you go out beating the shit out of people dressed in black leather, swinging around, doing all this crazy stuff, at the end of the night, you're going to have to let off a little steam, and you're probably going to get it on. And obviously, Tim Burton leaned all the way in with his Michelle Pfeiffer interpretation. When you've got actors who are as hot as Robert Pattinson and Zoe Kravitz, go all in on the sex appeal, and that was great. As I mentioned before, my number 4 would be Cobblepot. It's the only real levity in the movie. And my number 5 for my favorite ingredient would be just this corrupt city of vice. The clubs, the gambling, the screwing around. We've seen Gotham depicted as a city of corruption before, but this is probably the most complete interpretation of Gotham as a city in decline, so I really enjoyed that. In terms of my least favorite ingredients, the big debate's going to be whether or not this movie earns its 3-hour running time. Yes, it is 3 hours long, and I was on board, But I would argue that in the last hour, I don't know if this is from fatigue or just from the movie, but I was slightly less invested in that final stretch. And it's a tough sell to make people sit in a theater for 3 hours. There are some movies like The Godfather, which is, I think, 2 hours and 51 minutes, where it earns it. Or Lawrence of Arabia, I think it's like 3 hours and 20. It earns it. But goddamn, if you're going to make people sit there for 3 hours, you better deliver something really special. Otherwise, give me an 88-minute movie or a 92-minute movie. There's nothing wrong with a tight, economical hour and a half running time, and it's almost kind of an endangered species at this point. And my gut tells me this movie does earn the running time, but barely. But it's going to be tough to watch this movie on a loop because it's just a long-ass slog. Not slog's the wrong word, because it's enjoyable. But it's hard to just be in a depressed, bad mood for 3 hours straight. So it's not like James Gunn's The Suicide Squad from last summer, where you can just basically just watch it on a loop all day and just have fun every single time. This is a different kind of experience. But yes, I would say it earns the length, but that's debatable. But if I were to offer one major critique, it's hard to say this without it sounding really harsh, but there are times where the movie's just not that much fun. Like Dark Knight is fun from start to finish, and that's, classic. And Tim Burton's Batman is fun from start to finish. This movie's cool, and I found it visually arresting, and I love watching Robert Pattinson in the dark beating the crap out of people as guns go off. It's not like going to a rock concert, and so that's not a specific ingredient. That's just a choice in terms of their overall tone, but that is going to be a buzzkill for people who prefer to watch their Batman movies on a loop over and over again. And there are times where the action is a little tough to see because they chose to employ so much shadow and so much darkness that you're like, what the hell is even going on there? However, there are enough fight scenes that are fantastic that, not to worry, action fans are going to be very satisfied. So moving on to my next question, I wrote, how does it rank next to previous versions we've seen on screen? I don't think it's up there with the 2008 The Dark Knight. You only get those kinds of superhero movies once every 25 years, where it's just a total, complete game changer. But I might prefer it to Dark Knight Rises. I might prefer it to Batman Begins. I'm going to need to watch it 2 or 3 more times because I've seen all the Nolan Batman movies a billion times. I've seen the Tim Burton Batman movies many, many times. Joel Schumacher, I watched Batman Forever many times. I was 18 when that came out, so I saw it a lot. Batman and Robin I've only seen a few times. It's definitely way better than Batman and Robin. Whether or not it's better than Zack Snyder's interpretation of the character, this is where we're going to see some fan debate, because I would argue as a standalone movie, this is a better version of Batman than we saw in Batman v Superman. But I know there are a lot of people who were so emotionally invested in the Snyderverse and his take on just the DC universe. They're pissed at Warner Brothers for abandoning it, and basically just treating Zack Snyder like garbage, and then losing faith in his vision for the DC universe before it even really had a chance to get up and running. And as much as I enjoyed a lot of Zack Snyder's interpretation of Batman, especially that brilliant warehouse sequence where he's just beating the shit out of a lot of people, this movie's closer to what I want from a standalone Batman movie. So I would say that it ranks pretty close to the top of great Batman movies, but it's not at the top. And speaking of the Snyderverse and Warner Brothers' decision to move away from it, the big question is, does Batman work better as a standalone film franchise, or does it work better when it's part of a larger DC universe? And as somebody who read comics for decades, I would argue that creatively you can have your cake and eat it too. There are Batman comics that totally feel uniquely like a Batman story. However, then, a few weeks later, he can go off and have an adventure with Superman, and it doesn't clash. But you have to have somebody at the top organizing everything, and I feel like that's been one of the big problems with Warner Brothers over the last couple of years, is that just been this feeling of complete and total chaos, like nobody's minding the store and everybody's going in their different directions. I would love to see a Robert Pattinson trilogy where Robert Pattinson can go off and have adventures with other characters, but something tells me they're probably just going to make this a self-contained trilogy because it's just too much effort trying to organize a broader universe. But obviously it's possible. It's just really, really hard to do. And going back to Grant Morrison, perfect example. He wrote brilliant standalone Batman comics, but when he was also writing Justice League, he employed Batman perfectly in those adventures. So there you have it. If I could have a perfect world, you would have your standalone Batman movies, as well as him appearing in Justice League or Batman and the Outsiders or World's Finest Team or whatever the case might be. But one final point along those lines, if DC fans out there feel pissed off at Warner Brothers, I feel like have at it. Express yourself. We're the ones who are buying the tickets. We're the ones buying the Blu-rays. We're the ones buying the toys and the Happy Meals and all the crap related to these franchises. And I feel like anytime a franchise lets you down, you're not required to have blind loyalty to something because you liked it at one point. And I feel like people should say whatever the hell they feel like saying to Warner Brothers about how they manage or mismanage some of their franchises. And just speaking about the movie business in general, whether you're talking DC, Marvel, James Bond, like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Star Trek, you name it. I mean, there's so many franchises out there where more often than not, the shows and movies that are made in those settings, it's very easy to get discouraged because so many of them seem to get everything wrong or a lot wrong. It makes you appreciate a movie like The Batman when it comes along, where so much of it really works and feels good. So I guess my advice would be, no matter how pissed off you feel at Warner Brothers, don't deprive yourself of a great movie-going experience to prove a point, because they probably, I don't know how you get a giant corporation's attention, but it's so rare to see a good movie. It's really hard to make a movie, period. It's exponentially more difficult to make a good one. It's so rare that we get a great superhero movie. Just enjoy it. But as far as the management and mismanagement of all these giant franchises go, I will acknowledge that more often than not, I feel people's rage and frustration when I see something like Wheel of Time, which you see over my shoulder, getting completely, utterly butchered. Yeah, it wounds me, because obviously these are stories that have meant a lot to us in the past. And you never want to be one of those like mean aging fans that's like screaming at clouds. But on the other hand, sometimes if something sucks, you got to just call it out. So like I said, anybody who feels like letting Warner Brothers have it for whatever reason, go to it. I'm not gonna tell you that you're wrong. But it's getting late and I still need to edit this thing, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. So I guess my final point would be, Matt Reeves has made me a believer. I wouldn't say I was a skeptic going into this, but I was in a kind of wait and see posture, and I'm in. If he makes like a second and a third movie, I'll be there opening night. Robert Pattinson made me a believer. Zoe Kravitz made me a believer. As long as they're part of the equation moving forward, I'm in. And so in this ocean of content out there where so many shows and movies just straight up suck, I mean, there's no tap dancing around it. It's just a relief to see a good movie every once in a while. And so, yeah, I was a very satisfied movie lover while watching this. I wasn't doing cartwheels or tap dancing out of the theater, but I was in a very good mood walking out of the theater, and I'll be in a very good mood when I go back to the theater to see it for a second time. So hope you enjoyed this lengthy rant, and if you've been following my channel for a while, hope you appreciated this different format. I just didn't have the energy to write a bunch of crap and then read it, etc. I just wanted to do a little bit more of like a stream of consciousness kind of, emotional response. So I hope y'all enjoyed that. If you did, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell for any future content, and come back again tomorrow, because I'll be doing a big giant video about the new video game Elden Ring with my friend Martin Kessler, which is one of the coolest experiences I've had in gaming in like 10 fucking years. So anyway, rambling again, signing off. Thanks so much for listening, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.